Live. Everywhere. On netrootsradio.com. David Waldman. Kagro. In the morning. Now, here's David Waldman.
Hey, good morning, everybody. How you doing? It is Tuesday, January 31st, the last day of January. Already done with a month of this year. Jeez. January 31st, 2023, just to make sure you know which year it is that I'm talking about. And it's time for another show. Another show from upstairs in the isolation chamber. I gotta tell you, I think I'm liking the sound up here, but I don't love the setup. I don't like having all of the equipment kind of crowds the room a little bit, and so I don't know how long I'm going to stay up here. I'll go back down to the echo chamber, the live sounding, I guess, echo chamber that we usually broadcast out of, which, I guess I just never really realized how much ambient sound there was, but I assume you've come to enjoy hearing that ambient sound. So we'll probably move down there later on, as everybody here has now finally succumbed to COVID, and we're all positive at the same time, finally. Hooray. Although I haven't tested in a little while, I guess I've just assumed that while I was doing the course of Paxlovid that I was going to be remaining positive. And I do recall from the early days of the use of Paxlovid that people then sometimes bounced back and forth between positive and negative for something like the next 3 weeks. I don't really know what I'm going to learn from testing. But I understand now, and I guess maybe we'll wait to discuss this a little bit, perhaps with Greg later on this week, that the Biden administration has floated the idea anyway. I don't know how committed to it they are or what, that they will end the state of public health emergency that, I guess, officially props up the pandemic at this point, and end it in May, which I guess means that we move from one phase to another. I'm sure it triggers all sorts of things. Like, I imagine the cost of testing and treatment, if you should find yourself ill, will rise. I imagine that's probably been held down some by the package of regulations in place, but I can't recall that that's exactly the case. But it's the sort of thing you anticipate, at least here in the United States when it comes to healthcare measures like that. Sure, prices will go up. So there's that, but I guess fewer people will be interested in finding out whether they're positive or not, which has always been a bit of a problem here in the United States. I don't think, by the way, my own cases and the cases in my household are probably not being counted anywhere, as it appears from my nightly review of the statistics that make their way to Worldometer each night, that Virginia, because it's such a moderate thing to do, must have essentially stopped reporting at some point, and they no longer tell us anything about it. And I mentioned to you yesterday, I think, or I don't know whether I mentioned it on the air or just here at home, that the New York Times coronavirus tracking email that shows up in my mailbox right about airtime each day has for, 3 weeks or so now no longer been reporting actual numbers from Virginia, but rather just sort of a general condition of a transmission in the community. And that's not particularly helpful, and, never has been. But now we just sort of get the high, medium, low indicator. I wonder where we are today. I don't know. At any rate, we'll see what's going on in other stories. I will probably save the COVID wrap-up for when we have an actual, doctor on the line who actually keeps up on these things. Today, though, being Tuesday, we are looking forward to speaking with Joan McCarter. We missed out on talking to her last week on the first of our sick days, so it's been a while. And as it turns out, all sorts of things were going on in the news and in Congress and the places where they like to make things that they consider to be news. And she was watching it, and we were watching every last thing that there was to see on Netflix, but only half paying attention to it. I watched everything on Netflix twice last week. Once the first time, and then rewinding it a couple, 8-10 seconds at a time to read the subtitles I missed because I fell asleep waiting for the next line in whatever foreign import it was that I was watching. So, it was an exciting week. But apparently lots of things happened, and we'll have a chance to discuss them with her later on, and we'll relish that chance. In the meantime, we'll catch up on a couple other things. Yesterday, when we left off, you know how it is. You get started reading a piece, and then you only make it to 3/4 of the way through and run out of time. Yesterday's piece, and I really have to dig because things are piling up here, but we were reading through one of, I'm going to find it here. Yes, right here we are. The Business Insider rundown of the Charles McGonigal story, which we still have to finish up. I think there's only a paragraph or two left of that, but I think it helps set the context, and then we can handle some of the commentary that we didn't even get to yesterday, and then move on to the other legal happenings and political happenings that, well, gosh, I can't even tell you what an enormous impact they'll eventually have, and we're only, I think, a lot of us, meaning, your fellow voters here in the United States of America, only sort of beginning to wake up to. So anyway, I think we had left off, we were reading about Charles McGonigal's relationship with his girlfriend, who was her first name? I see her, I'm reminded of her last name is Guerriero, but what was her for? Allison Guerriero. They only refer to her by last name, throughout the rest of the article. But we were just learning about, she was telling this sympathetic story about how, essentially she had been, I don't know, I guess to this point they really just they didn't say that he was mistreating her per se, but he was, leading her on to believe that he was going to leave his wife and his family and perhaps marry her, or at least settle down somewhat with her, but it turns out never to have been the intention. But at any rate, also his weird behavior about having large bags of cash sitting around the room and not telling her exactly the truth about where they came from and what they were doing with them. But then we began to learn, we're going to end up with a she's no angel story here. But it might not be off base or unjustified. She is saying, in the middle of her stress over, I guess, her relationship with McGonigal, she resorts to drinking. She abuses his family, contacts them and sends them threatening emails and the like. Not great, to be sure. Now, there's a little some more weirdness to it, and let's just get to that. So we left off, I think, by reading that Guerriero acknowledges that the combination of her alcohol abuse and her health problems led to some extreme behavior, including her sending hostile emails to McGonigal's family, the contents of which she cannot recall. We'll see about that. I really did go overboard, she said. I harassed them. I'm not going to deny that I was horrible to them. Now, by her own account, Guerriero contacted one of McGonigal's children. Not great. Despite being prohibited from doing so by a court order, shouldn't even have to get that far, an incident that led to her spending the night in a New Jersey jail. The court order stemmed from a 2019 police report obtained by Insider that McGonigal's wife, Pamela, filed with the Montgomery County Police Department in Maryland. The report states that McGonigal and Guerriero had a relationship and that Guerriero had repeatedly harassed her with unwelcome emails and phone calls, including 20 calls in one day, despite her asking Guerriero to stop. Guerriero confirmed that her contact with the McGonigal family led to a separate restraining order issued in New Jersey. I am ashamed and embarrassed and sorry for my actions during the time that I was drinking, she said. Okay, that's about as minimal as you can get in terms of apology. Guerriero's troubles worsened in 2021. So even more recently than that, they're worse. When she was badly burned during a fire at her father's house. She asked friends for help through GoFundMe. Now, this is where it gets a little weird and interesting. Former Mayor Rudy Giuliani of New York City, they helpfully point out here, whom she knew from law enforcement circles, let her stay in a guest bedroom. That's a close relationship. Since then, Guerriero has been a frequent on-air caller for Giuliani's radio shows. Oh, boy. She maintains that in the 2020 election, that the 2020 election was marred by widespread voter fraud, a belief pushed by Giuliani that has been repeatedly debunked. And then this quote, "Whatever Giuliani says about the 2020 election is what I believe," she said. Oh, I see. So one of those sorts of people. Now, you can see now she's not only something less than an angel, but maybe somebody who has brought their misfortune upon themselves after all. Interesting. Well, that's quite a statement. During her relationship with McGonagall, Guerriero says they never talked about politics. I thought he was apolitical, she said, which is something I continue to believe. That's interesting because I think there's a typo in here. It says, I thought he was apolitical, he said. I think they meant she said. And I corrected it when I read it. But okay. The FBI declined to address the specifics of Guerriero's story. Instead, it sent a statement from Director Christopher Wray, who said the FBI holds employees to the, quote, the highest standard and treats everyone equally, even when it is one of our own. Insiders spoke with 3 of McGonagall's former law enforcement colleagues who expressed shock about the indictments. "It's heartbreaking," said one, who had worked alongside McGonagall at the FBI. "This is an incredible organization filled with truly dedicated men and women. This sets our image and reputation back." Guerriero's father said his view of the FBI has already been tarnished by the way the McGonagall treated his daughter. "I've always had a huge admiration for the FBI," he said. "I idealized the agents that I saw in the movies." Well, you idealized actors anyway. "I thought these people were gods, that they never did anything wrong. It was so disappointing." He did say, however, that McGonagall had called him after the relationship ended to apologize for his behavior and that he had accepted McGonagall's apology. So there's a lot of apologizing going on and acceptance of apologies, which I guess is a nice thing, maybe for them psychologically. I don't know. But as it turns out, this very sympathetic sounding story sort of takes this weird twist at the end and, she's actually a huge Rudy Giuliani fan and an election denier. Well, I do feel a little differently about that story now. And by the way, it's increasingly ridiculous to believe that everyone here was apolitical somehow. They just ended up denying the elections together, dating one another, and taking bribes from Oleg Deripaska and buying gifts for the girlfriend, probably with that money. And, oh gosh, well, it's so difficult to understand their situation and where they're coming from and what a complex environment. No, then it just turned out to be Trumpy all the way through. And no wonder they're having such a hard time having a normal relationship and enjoying life. They're involved with the worst person in the world and the colleagues of the worst person in the world and passing money around to boot. So anyway, I just thought that was kind of an interesting ending to that story and an interesting twist on things. What I had mentioned yesterday, and there's still a ton in here, but Greg alluded to this story yesterday. I think probably this is one of the better sources of commentary on all this. Oh, look at this. Now it's paywalled. Maybe it was always paywalled and I didn't know it. But the piece here hopefully comes through on Pocket. It does. It's Will Bunch in the Philadelphia Inquirer. And, there's a lot to write about that's crowding out the news probably in Philadelphia these days because it turns out that those lousy bums in the football outfit there have made it to the Super Bowl, and they're paying attention to very little else, I think, these days. But before that happened, Will Bunch wrote for the Inquirer, "The New York Times should tell its readers whether it helped crooked FBI agents get Trump elected in 2016. I'm pretty sure Greg read us the headline of that piece. And this is an interesting and necessary take on the McGonagall story. As he writes it, it was arguably the most consequential October surprise in the history of American presidential elections, except it didn't come together, but it would have been one. In the I see. We're talking about the 2016 October surprise rather than the attempt at the October surprise for 2020. But okay. in the waning days of the race in 2016, with polls showing Hillary Clinton clinging to a lead over Donald Trump. Two last-minute stories broke that rekindled the on-the-fence voters' ethical doubts about Democrat Clinton and quashed a budding scandal around her GOP or GOP rival. Except the October surprise was no surprise to one key player, Rudy Giuliani, the ex-New York mayor and Trump insider who later became the 45th president's attorney. Late that month, Giuliani told Fox News that the trailing Republican nominee had, quote, a surprise or two that you're going to hear about in the next few days. I mean, I'm talking about some pretty big surprises. Just 2 days later, then FBI Director James Comey revealed the Bureau had reopened its probe into Clinton's emails. You remember her emails. Based on a possible discovery of new communications on the laptop belonging to disgraced New York Politico Anthony Weiner. The news jolted the campaign with a particularly strong boost from the New York Times, which devoted 2/3 of its front page to the story, and the notion that it was a major blow to Clinton's prospects. It was later reported that Comey was motivated to make the unusual announcement about the laptop. This was always sort of a question mark here, and this is, I don't even know if this is a new reveal. I don't think so. I think it came out of his book, and so it's something that most people have known for a long time, but it never really registered with me, and this McGonigal story helps tie it all together. It was later reported that Comey was motivated to make the unusual announcement about the laptop because he feared leaks from the FBI's New York field office, which, according to Reuters, had, quote, a faction of investigators based in the office known to be hostile to Hillary Clinton. We definitely have heard that for a long time. Indeed, Giuliani bragged immediately after that he had sources in the FBI, including current agents. And I think that was sort of always known, but I don't know if I definitely registered the idea that Comey made his announcement because he figured if I don't make it, it'll be leaked from the New York FBI office, and, then it'll be out of control. It'll be much worse. They'll be controlling the narrative, and at least we can sort of kind of give it our half-assed cover of saying, well, we're reopening it, but, we're not sure, and we're going to try and conclude it before the election. And whereas if, I guess if you had left it to the leakers and to Giuliani, I don't know how the story could have played much worse, but they might have found it, instead of the 2/3 of the front page of the New York Times, it would be the entirety of the front page and 2/3 of page 2 as well, and all over the place. Who knows? Anyway, I had sort of ignored that possibility, or not really picked up on that detail, that Comey was motivated to do this stupid, outrageous thing because he thought it would be worse if he just didn't do anything and the FBI office in New York would do it. And meanwhile, we now learn, well, of course the FBI office in New York would do it, not just because all the agents there, well, not all the agents there, but a large number of agents reportedly were personally opposed to Clinton's election and supported Trump, but as it turns out, the head of the counterintelligence group there was on the take from Oleg Deripaska and the Russian oligarchs themselves, who are in fact trying to engineer a Trump win and a Clinton loss. It wasn't just that their partisanship would lead them to leak this information. They were very possibly being bribed for exactly that purpose, it now turns out. That's kind of big, I think. Let me return to the way Will Bunch has put it here. The supposed bombshell, and it turned out there was nothing incriminating or particularly new on the laptop, wasn't the only FBI-related story that boosted Trump in the home stretch of the 2016 campaign. On October 31st, citing unnamed, quote, intelligence sources, the Times reported, investigating Donald Trump, FBI sees no clear link to Russia. I had forgotten the exact date on that headline, but yeah, October 31st. So we're now talking, just days before the election, right in the middle of early voting and everything. It's Halloween 2016. The New York Times goes with the front page story. The FBI sees, no links between Trump and Russia. And as it turns out, the person who was supposed to be investigating whether or not there was a link between Trump and Russia was being bribed by the same Russian oligarchs who were bribing Trump and the Trump campaign. And no wonder he saw no clear links to Russia. He was paid not to. That's kind of a problem. Anyway, once again, I'll just leave it to Will Bunch to make the case here. That article defused a budding scandal about the GOP White House hopeful, at least until after Trump's shock election on November 8th, 2016, just like 9 days later, right? In the coming days and weeks, the basis of that Times article would melt, but by then, the most unlikely POTUS in U.S. history was ensconced in the Oval Office. There are many reasons for Trump's victory, but experts have argued the FBI disclosures were decisive. In 2017, polling guru Nate Silver, not that I care to base everything on Nate Silver, but it's here, argued that the Comey probe disclosure cost Clinton as many as 3 to 4 percentage points and at least 1 percentage point, which would have, what does that mean? What kind of sentence is that? Cost Clinton as many as 3 to 4 percentage points and at least 1 percentage point. How? Well, of course. All right. I don't know what he's going for here. Anyway, which would have flipped. Oh, yes. 1 percentage point, maybe, I guess, would have flipped Pennsylvania, Michigan, Wisconsin, and handed her the Electoral College. I see. I think maybe that's what they're saying. It cost her 3 to 4 points when 1 point would have reversed the election. Clearly, the wrong investigation was reopened. This week, stunning corruption charges against a top FBI spy master who assumed a key role in the Bureau's New York office just weeks before the 2016 October surprise. An agent who by 2018 was known to be working for a Vladimir Putin-tied Russian oligarch should cause America to rethink everything we know about the Trump-Russia scandal and how it really happened that Trump won the election. Pretty much, it really should. That's my view, too. The government allegations against the former G-man Charles McGonigal, also accused of taking large foreign payment while still on the FBI payroll, and the outsized American influence of the sanctioned and later indicted Russian billionaire Oleg Deripaska, also tied to U.S. pals from Trump campaign manager Paul Manafort to Senate GOP leader Mitch McConnell. And yes, it was Deripaska and his outfit that opened the aluminum plant in Kentucky. Anyway, Deripaska and all his ties should make us look again at what was really up with the FBI in 2016. How coordinated was the effort in that New York field office to pump up the ultimate nothing burger about Clinton's emails while poo-pooing the very real evidence of Russian interference on Trump's behalf? And I think there's two meanings to that sentence, if you ask me. Poo-pooing the very real evidence of Russian interference on Trump's behalf. Both poo-pooing the fact that there was Russian interference on Trump's behalf, and they were poo-pooing that evidence on Trump's behalf in order to help his campaign as well. You see what I mean? Not only was there interference in order to help him, it also helped him to cover up the fact that there was this evidence of this interference. Anyway, pumping up the ultimate nothing burger about Clinton's emails, poo-pooing the very real evidence of Russian interference on Trump's behalf, and who were the agents behind it, right? All of this, how coordinated was their work and who was the agents behind it? What was the role, if any, of McGonigal in his international web of intrigue? Was the now tainted McGonigal a source who told the New York Times that fateful October that Russia was not trying to help Trump win the election before the U.S. intelligence community determined the exact opposite? If not McGonigal, just who was intentionally misleading America's most influential news organization and why? But apparently, by the way, no interest in an investigation on their part into whether or not, they were duped or who were their sources and should they burn them. As a veteran journalist, Will Bunch writes, I find the Times' role in this fiasco, although likely an unwitting one, deeply disturbing. To be sure, the 2016 FBI leaks weren't the first time a major news organization has been burned by anonymous law enforcement sources, and regrettably, it probably won't be the last. Media critics have been talking for years about the Times' flawed coverage and how it's near certainty that Clinton would win, and a desire to show its aggressiveness towards a future president seems to have skewed its coverage. It's not only that America's so-called paper of record has never apologized for its over-the-top coverage of the Clinton emails or the deeply flawed story about the Trump Russia probe, it's that the Times has shown a stunning lack of curiosity about finding out what went wrong. In May of 2017, or just 7 months after Trump's election, the paper ended the position of public editor, an independent journalist who was embedded in a newsroom to cover controversies exactly like these. Publisher Arthur Sulzberger said the rise of social media meant the public could now raise such questions. They can, but then they get yelled at and blocked by anybody who, is the target of those questions. But, okay, so those questions are being raised. When can we expect answers? I've sent a Twitter direct message to one of the co-authors of the 2016 Trump-Russia article, Eric Lichtblau, and hold on for our music here, and attempted connecting with the other, Stephen Lee Myers, and I'll let you know if I hear back. Anyway, last week's indictment of McGonigal is a classic case of raising more questions than were answered. The evidence presented by prosecutors suggests the FBI counterintelligence expert wasn't introduced to Deripaska until his waning days in the Bureau in 2018. Aided by a pair of Russian diplomats. That's an interesting twist. Of course, there could have been intermediaries doing the work in between. We'll see. Hi, everybody. It's me, David. Let's change things up from the old fundraising pitch for just a minute and talk instead about how you can be a part of our show. If you've got a smartphone or any other electronic recording device, why not sit down and record a segment for us? Read us an important article and give us your take. Read one of your own original essays, or even just give us your commentary on something you'd like to share that's important to you. Then send the file to me at kagrox@gmail.com, and I'll try and work it into the show. Short segments, a few minutes in length, are easiest to fit in. And of course, I can't always guarantee that I'll be able to play everything, but if you've ever shouted at your radio or TV about something you wish was being covered, here's your chance to change that. Make the show your own. Send your submissions to me at kagrox@gmail.com. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. My goodness. All right, well, I have lots of business to attend to in the breaks that is not show-related, and I really don't have time to to deal with any of it, but I let it distract me nonetheless. And, well, it cost us, at least in terms of our reintroduction to the story. Where were we? Yes, reading Will Bunch's story in the Philadelphia Inquirer, and learning along the way here that the evidence presented about McGonigal actually appears to be, or at least the prosecutors are currently claiming, that that Deripaska wasn't actually introduced, I guess, personally to McGonigal until he was almost done with his work at the FBI just before his retirement in 2018, so post-2016 election. However, all of the evidence we were reading the other day was that Deripaska's money and connections were, at that point, flowing to McGonigal through intermediaries anyway. So I don't know that it's extremely important that he ever meets the guy behind the money before he, begins acting on his behalf. I don't think that has ever stopped anybody. But at any rate, in 2019, it reads, after he'd retired, the indictment says McGonigal went to work for the oligarch, more directly, I guess, to help him evade U.S. sanctions and to investigate a rival. What do you know? What a great plan. I wonder if anybody in Trump world or connected to the Russian oligarchs has ever given any thought to bribing police and law enforcement officials to investigate their rivals and whether Trump had ever heard of such a thing. Well, anyway, but the Times also reported that U.S. counterintelligence, in which McGonigal had been a key player, had tried unsuccessfully to recruit Deripaska as an asset in the years around the 2016 election. So that would have given him an excellent opportunity to work as a double agent of sorts. Oh yeah, I'm being recruited by the U.S. to betray Putin. Well, how about if I instead do Putin's work and occasionally give them tips about how they can find somebody else, or I don't know. That sounds very unlikely. I mean, I guess give it a try. Sure, counterintelligence tries to recruit Deripaska, but Deripaska is already there working as an agent, corrupting your counterintelligence bureau. So good luck trying to win that one. Like the Woody Allen character Zelig, Deripaska, a 55-year-old aluminum magnate, I always enjoy that, who at one time was the richest man in Putin's Russia, is turning up in the background everywhere in the ongoing corruption of American democracy. That's why we keep saying his name. The oligarch's history of multi-million-dollar business dealings with Paul Manafort, Trump's campaign manager in the summer of 2016, is central to the theory of Russian interference after it was confirmed that Manafort shared key campaign data with suspected Russian intelligence agents also connected to Deripaska. I think maybe it was just one. I added an unfortunate S to the end of that. One intelligence agent. And wasn't that Konstantin Kalimnik, as I recall? In 2019, Deripaska did manage to get those U.S. sanctions lifted. Wow. In a controversial deal backed not only by Team Trump, but critically by then Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell. Why would we do such a thing, right? That same year, a Deripaska-linked aluminum company announced it would build a large plant in Kentucky, where McConnell was running for re-election. It eventually, by the way, wasn't built. They got the sanctions lifted. They got McConnell on board. He won his election, and then they were like, yeah, never mind, we're not building that thing. This is the same McConnell who, during that critical fall period of 2016, refused to sign a bipartisan statement warning about Russian election interference, which kind of brings me to another subject. We'll see if I can remember it. But if not, maybe you can remind me later. But it brings me back to my pet peeve about the Kevin McCarthy, I swear, I think Putin's paying Trump comments during that tape-recorded conversation among the Republican House leaders. Yeah, that once again, there were Republicans insisting that they refused to go along with allowing the federal government apparatus to acknowledge and pursue the Trump-Russia connection because it would be too political. They considered it to be a political attack, a politicization of the federal government, a weaponization, as Jim Jordan would have it now. And they preferred then to let the Russian interference go on because, of course, it inured to the benefit of Republicans. They were going to win because of the interference, so they obviously didn't want to do anything to intervene in it because, as you know, party over country. Anyway, just a reminder of McConnell's stance then and why he blocked the Obama administration from intervening in the intervention of the Russians in the election. If you do this, we'll attack you. We'll call it political. We'll use it against Clinton, et cetera, et cetera. We need you to keep your mouth shut about the Trump-Russia interference. And one of the things that's holding me to that is the promise of the delivery of this major aluminum plant that makes me look like an effective legislator for Kentucky, even though it has nothing to do with any Senate action that this thing would be built there. But I'm going to claim credit for it. And then when I win re-election, probably, yoink, pull out the rug from underneath that thing and never build it. And, look, Kentuckians will never care. And too late, nothing for us to do about it. We just have to sit here and wait for him to use up his 6 years after lying to us. George Santos style. Anyway, it's becoming clear I may have skipped this sentence here. Another coincidence in a scandal that is drowning in so-called coincidences. This whole McConnell fiasco is how he's referring to it there. It's becoming clear that the tamping down of the most explosive parts of the Trump-Russia story is the greatest case of gaslighting since the George Cukor movie, did I pronounce his name correctly, dropped in 1944. It's not just the FBI leaks in New York. We also learned last week, yes, thanks to the same New York Times, about the extraordinary and it's difficult to read this formatting in the pocket version. I wish we had gotten past the paywall there. So, thanks to the same New York Times, we learned about the extraordinary and ethically dubious lengths that Trump's second Attorney General, William Barr, and Barr's hand-picked special prosecutor, John Durham, went to try to prove the FBI was out to sink Trump. That's part 2 of the amazing things that happened last week that we didn't get a chance to discuss in real time, and we were very sad about that. But not only was all of this being discovered, and we were finding out that the FBI's counterintelligence chief was on the take from Deripaska, but in addition to all of that, later on, William Barr colludes with Trump to name John Durham special prosecutor to investigate the real rottenness behind all of this, which, as you know, in their opinion was, well, isn't this really about the Democrats weaponizing the Department of Justice and the FBI and trying to use it against poor Donald Trump? In other words, even at the Attorney General level, every Republican accusation is really a confession. Once again. So, yeah, there we are. We learned that William Barr and Barr's handpicked special prosecutor John Durham went to extraordinary and possibly, as he says, ethically dubious lengths to prove that the FBI was out to sink Trump. And that's the exact opposite of what really happened. Indeed, the Times noted that the only major criminality turned up in the Durham probe was a potentially explosive new charge of financial impropriety by Donald Trump. By the way, and I don't think it might not be treated in this article, but we'll get around to it eventually in discussing what's going on or what went on with the Durham thing. But in case we don't, the long story short that I wanted to pull out of that is that they do, in fact, uncover evidence in the Durham investigation. They get a tip from the Italian government that says we have evidence of possibly some significant financial improprieties, and Donald Trump is personally involved. We have evidence of that. They hand that evidence over to the FBI or to the special prosecutor's office, and they decide, all right, first they say, well, we're not going to do anything about it. And no investigation has opened on that. And that requires some investigating. Not only does it require investigating the tip, but investigating why nobody investigated the tip the first time around. But second of all, again, Barr, in a second go-round of every Republican accusation is a confession, Barr and Trump actually use it, and Barr kind of reverses himself later on and says, no, wait a minute, it doesn't go quite that far. But Trump certainly uses the information from the tip from Italy to say, we've received information of some very serious criminal wrongdoing, and we're going to be tracking that down. And in other words, he got wind of the Italians having evidence and tipping off the FBI that they thought that they had caught Trump in an illegal financial arrangement of some kind. And he takes the information and says, we got a tip from the Italians about somebody committing a very serious crime. That just goes to show how awesome and necessary and important this John Durham investigation is. And they were talking about him. He just took that part out of the story and used it and dropped hints in the press that there was serious crimes being uncovered. And that's why we had to continue on with the Durham investigation. They were his crimes. That's incredible. Anyway, back to Will Bunch here. 7 years later, the lack of accountability and justice for the gaslighting of American democracy is appalling. Barr did a remarkable job in blunting the investigation by special counsel Robert Mueller, including squashing his findings about obstruction of justice by the Trump administration. A much-hyped probe by Justice Department Inspector General Michael Horowitz into the FBI's New York office took 4 long years and failed to find the leakers. And new revelations, including the tip about Trump financial crimes that Italian intelligence passed on to Barr and Durham, continue to surface. Why does it matter? Well, Trump is no longer president, after all, and America has a lot of other problems, with police brutality and mass shootings currently on the front burner. They're always there, though. Yet when it comes to this all-encompassing Trump-Russia scandal, the past isn't even past. This seemingly untouchable 45th president was in New Hampshire and South Carolina this weekend, campaigning to become the 47th. The man that critics call Moscow Mitch McConnell could return as majority leader in that same election. And Putin's obsession with Ukraine, always a focus of his U.S. interference and Trump dealings, has become a war with dire global implications. More importantly, this never-ending scandal has demolished our trust in so many institutions, an FBI that seems to have corrupted an election, a Justice Department that covered up those deeds instead of exposing them, and yes, a New York Times that enabled several lies instead of exposing them. Congress and Merrick Garland's Justice Department can shine a true light on this giant mess, but there's a reason I'm picking on the New York Times today. It's a massive temple of journalism that gives us both great work, like the Barr-Durham piece, and inexcusably bad work on a daily basis. The Times can finally apologize for the sins of 2016, expose exactly what went wrong, and then reveal the rest, so this kind of disaster never happens again. They owe it to American democracy. McGonigal, meanwhile, will get a chance to clear his name in court. His defense lawyer comes from the firm Bracewell LLC, the firm that was previously known as Giuliani and Bracewell, after its one-time name partner, the former New York City mayor. Just another coincidence, probably. That's how he concludes his piece here. And, pardon me, now time to perhaps jump back into, definitely back into Pocket to see what else we want to add to the mix here. Man, there's a lot. I recall this being a particularly interesting take on the McGonigal story as well. The Substack piece from Timothy Snyder, who I'm trying to think, am I familiar with Timothy Snyder at all? And it's a long one here, but I wanted to give some context about exactly who he was. But anyway, I did get a skim of his article the other day, and I wanted to share it with you. Might as well dive right into it because we've got a long way to go. We are on the edge of a spy scandal with major implications for how we understand the Trump administration, our national security, and ourselves. And we're running out of time, by the way, under the statute of limitations for dealing with a lot of this stuff. And that's exactly what Trump was hoping for from the beginning. On January 23rd, we learned that a former FBI special agent, Charles McGonigal, was arrested on charges involving taking money to serve foreign interests. One accusation is that in 2017 he took $225,000 from a foreign actor while in charge of counterintelligence at the FBI's New York office. Another charge is that McGonigal took money from Oleg Deripaska, a sanctioned Russian oligarch, after McGonigal's 2018 retirement from the FBI. Deripaska, a hugely wealthy metals tycoon close to the Kremlin, Putin's favorite industrialist, as he's called here, was a figure in a Russian influence operation that McGonigal had investigated in 2018. In other words, even though the connection, the more direct connection to Deripaska isn't until post-election, and he doesn't actually go to work directly for him until after his retirement for the FBI, the question is why McGonigal's actions prior to 2018, and in fact at the same time as he's serving not only in the FBI field office but investigating this situation, why his actions though there's no clear link between the two of them at the moment, were curiously pro-Deripaska at every turn, when he should have been, the target instead. Anyway, Deripaska, as we said, a hugely wealthy metals tycoon close to the Kremlin, was a figure in the Russian influence operation that McGonigal had investigated in 2016 and somehow managed to, kind of walk out of there with nothing serious happening to him. And by the way, the influence operation worked. Deripaska has been under American sanctions since 2018. Deripaska is also the former employer and the creditor of Trump's 2016 campaign manager, Paul Manafort. Never forget that, please. The reporting on this so far seems to miss the larger implications. One of them is that Trump's historical position looks far cloudier. In 2016, Trump's campaign manager, Manafort, was a former employee of a Russian oligarch, Deripaska, and owed money to that same Russian oligarch. And the FBI, and they like to, kill people who don't pay the money that they owe them. Just thought we'd point that out. And the FBI special agent, McGonigal, who was charged with investigating the Trump campaign's Russian connections, later, after doing good work, I guess, over at the FBI in their view, went to work, according to the indictment, for that very same Russian oligarch, Deripaska. This is obviously very bad for Trump personally, but it's also very bad for FBI New York, for the FBI generally, and for the United States of America, if you care about that. Another is that we must revisit the Russian influence operation on Trump's behalf in 2016 and the strangely weak American response. Moscow's goal was to move minds and institutions such that Hillary Clinton would lose and Donald Trump would win. We might like to think that any FBI special agent would resist, oppose, or at least be immune to such an operation. Now, we are reliably informed that a trusted FBI actor, one who was responsible for dealing with just this sort of operation, was corrupt. And again, the issue is not just that particular person. If someone as important as McGonigal could take money from foreigners while on the job at FBI New York and then go to work for a sanctioned Russian oligarch he was once investigating, what is at stake at a bare minimum is the culture of FBI New York's office, the FBI's New York office. He sometimes changes the way he refers to it there. But the larger issue is the health of our national discussions of politics and the integrity of our election process. Small issue. We're kind of concerned about that, right? For me personally, McGonigal's arrest brought back an unsettling memory. In 2016, McGonigal was in charge of cyber counterintelligence for the FBI and was put in charge of counterintelligence at the FBI's New York office. That April, this is Timothy Snyder writing this, broke the story of the connection between Trump's campaign and Putin's regime on the basis of Russian open sources. At the time, almost no one wanted to take this connection seriously. American journalists wanted an American source, but the people who had experienced similar Russian operations were in Russia, Ukraine, or Estonia. Too few people took Trump seriously, and too few people took Russia seriously. Too few people took cyber seriously. The Venn diagram overlap of people who took all three seriously felt very small. Yet there was also specific nagging worry that my own country was not only unprepared, but something worse. After I wrote that piece and another, and they're linked here, I heard intimations that something was odd about the FBI office in New York. This was no secret at the time. One did not need to be close to such matters to get that drift. And given that FBI New York was the office dealing with cyber counterintelligence, this was worrying. The reason I was thinking about Trump and Putin back in 2016 was a pattern that I had noticed in Eastern Europe, which is my area of expertise. Again, Tim Snyder writing here. Between 2010 and 2013, Russia sought to control Ukraine using the same methods which were on display in 2016 in its influence operation in the United States. This is prior to their actual invasion of Crimea and Eastern Ukraine, right? They were trying to do it by influence operation, the same one they attempted in 2016 in the United States. Social media, money, and a pliable candidate for head of state. You remember, who was, I can't even recall the names of the various Russia-connected politicians who they were looking to run as puppets, but I've now mixed up all of their names. But remember that Paul Manafort was working for those candidates in the Ukraine. Another connection, and I think he makes this mention here in his piece here. When that failed, though, Russia simply had invaded Ukraine. When that failed, Russia had invaded Ukraine under the cover of some very successful influence operations. If you find that you do not remember the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014, it is very possibly because you were caught in the froth of Russian propaganda spread through the internet and targeted to vulnerabilities. The success of that propaganda encouraged Russia to intervene in the United States using the same methods and institutions. This is what I was working on in 2016 when a similar operation was clearly underway in the United States. Now, I want to break off at this point to go back to the point I wanted to make earlier and return to my hobby horse. He's saying, without saying here, he doesn't recall this part of it in this article, but what he's laid out here is the case that from the early 2010s, 2010, 2012, 2013, and 14, all of the signs were there of the escalation in Russia of the idea that they could run influence programs and try to manipulate the politics of Western democracies. And as it says in the paragraph above, let's see, right? American journalists were a little skeptical of the Trump-Russia thing. They wanted an American source, but all the people, as he says, who had experienced similar Russian operations were in Russia, Ukraine, or Estonia, where they were actually doing these things. So, on the one hand, you might think, well, you could be forgiven for not knowing exactly what's going on in terms of political intrigues and even in social media manipulation in Russia, Ukraine, or Estonia. After all, we don't speak the languages. They're not really in our sphere of influence, et cetera, et cetera. And for most Americans, it was kind of confusing. Like, yes, Russians sort of do interfere in the politics of former client states of the Soviet Union. I mean, I guess they still wish that their empire was hanging together. That's maybe not surprising, maybe is surprising, I don't know. But it was just sort of generally ignored in the United States. That's why my hobby horse about that tape-recorded conversation seems so important in my mind is, sure, you could be forgiven for not knowing, but what about if the Ukrainian prime minister flew all the way to Washington, D.C. to meet with you face-to-face as the leadership, the majority leadership in the United States House of Representatives at the time, and brief you personally? You need to know, not only is this a major international crisis brewing and a real danger for my country, but we've come to understand that it could be and might be happening right now, that it's a major concern and a major danger for your country. The problem is he didn't really, I don't know, maybe he knew, maybe he didn't know that he was coming to speak to Republicans who stood to benefit from this. And I guess maybe he thought, well, sure, the party would benefit, but they definitely don't want Putin running the United States of America, right? Well, here, maybe McCarthy isn't so dumb in that he's saying, well, the real problem is that maybe Republicans do want Putin running the country because the top Republican in the party is on the payroll for Putin right now. So it may not have been a one-off mistake, but it was a confession that they weren't going to do anything about it, and exactly why they weren't going to do anything about it. Everyone recognized that it was inuring to the benefit of Republicans. Only McCarthy was willing to blurt out that there was one particularly powerful Republican who stood to ensure that it continued, that there was monetary backup to all of this as well. This is the reason not only do we want to accrue power and win the elections, but I would like to make cash as well. I want that. So two pretty strong motivations here. But yeah, to me, I thought that could have stood for more prominent mention in here. We were warned by the cases of Ukraine and Estonia. But if that wasn't clear enough, the Prime Minister of Ukraine shows up to tell the Republican leaders exactly what's going on and that America is in danger of being subject to the very same sort of influence operation. And, also aside from the fact that they eventually end up saying, well, it's just bad for Republicans for us to expose this. We should just ride it out and trade it in for judicial appointments and tax cuts and call it a win. But there's also genuine confusion among the Republican leadership ranks about where they stand in terms of how they feel about such international influence operations themselves. There's the exchange between Kathy McMorris Rodgers and Paul Ryan and others in this, in which they all say many of them say not only they just had the meeting with the Prime Minister of Ukraine, but that they had been to Ukraine and they had seen what was going on. And it was very clear to them. Remember, they used such terminology as that it was maniacal, the propaganda campaign that was going on in Ukraine. So they were clear on it, aware of it, and understood what was happening and why it was happening. Not necessarily that it was a clear danger to the United States as well. I don't think that they ever thought, I don't know, maybe they did think it was the case. Maybe they thought that Americans are exceptional and they would withstand it or something like that. But then they had an argument about Paul Ryan saying something along the lines of, yeah, well, all of this stuff is happening, but guess who was the only one standing up to it and doing something about it? It's us. And Kathy McMorris Rodgers says, yeah, but we're not. We're not doing anything about it. In fact, we're doing less than nothing about it. And in fact, the real story was not only doing less than nothing about it, they were on the take, essentially, in order to implement the same thing here. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. I think I'm going to stick to the subject here, despite the other number of stories that we have to bring up, and probably should be setting the table for Joan to come in. But I just wanted to continue on a little bit more with this Timothy Snyder Substack piece. As he continues, he says, the reason that he was thinking about Trump and Putin back in 2016 was he was seeing a pattern, which was essentially the one he just laid out, that this was happening in Estonia, in Ukraine, inside Russia as well, bore all the hallmarks of a continuing pattern of operations by the Russians, and that it was likely to be moving to the United States as well, and that their success with it in 2014, especially, and in Ukraine, basically convincing the Western world that the invasion of Ukraine either wasn't really going on or wasn't what we thought it was, or hell, you had Donald Trump at the time representing the Republican Party and running for president saying that it wasn't really an invasion in Ukraine because, after all, Ukraine was basically Russian and more people who lived there were Russian and wanted to be a part of Russia. And this was right and proper. And, the Ukrainians came to say, no, it was not. But the Republican position ended up being, well, we're going to ignore it anyway. So, as he points out here, if you find that you don't remember the Russian invasion of Ukraine, which is amazing because it's a plain fact, but whenever we refer in shorthand here in the United States, and this is a problem, even those of us who remember, when we say, well, when the Russians invaded Ukraine in 2000, I don't even remember what we're talking about here, 2022, but they originally invaded in 2014. Sometimes we remember to say that, but most of America doesn't. They really don't remember the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2014. And this is an interesting possibility, as Snyder throws out. If you don't, it might be because you were caught in the same froth of Russian propaganda spread through the internet and targeted to vulnerabilities. You may be able to recall that, that's right. But the fact that you can't bring it immediately to mind. I mean, this would be the rough equivalent of saying, had we lost the Revolutionary War perhaps, and propaganda was able to convince us that the Declaration of Independence, as interesting as it was issued late in the war in an effort to try to rally the troops, but it had already been lost at that point. If they dated it 1781 or something, several years later. No, it happened in 1776. Yeah, not really. It didn't. And convincing. And now there's half the world either just doesn't remember or is out there on the internet saying, yeah, everyone knows 1781, not 1776. You would be baffled about that. Just, I guess, as the Ukrainians are, what do you mean you think the invasion started in 2022? It started in 2014. Everybody knows that. And we don't. We're, oh yeah. The fact that it has to be recalled that way is, in Snyder's view, testament to the power of the Russian influence operation. The success of that propaganda encouraged Russia to intervene in the United States using the same methods and institutions. And I suppose if you're sitting there looking at it and saying, I don't know how it happened, but we convinced the world that we invaded Ukraine 6 years after we had already done it. And only at that point do they acknowledge that we invaded Ukraine. That's pretty successful. We might be able to do something in the meantime elsewhere. And maybe you want to try the United States. So this is what I was working on, Snyder says, in 2016, when a similar operation was clearly underway in the United States. To this observer of Ukraine, he writes, it was apparent that Russia was backing Trump in much the way that it had once backed Ukrainian president. Now their names come back to us because they're mentioned here. They're backing Trump in much the way that it had once backed Ukrainian President Viktor Yanukovych. And remember, I think we learned somewhere along the line that my pronunciation of it was wrong. And Yanukovych was what they were using. So Viktor Yanukovych, in the hopes of soft control, right? They thought that they would install Yanukovych as their puppet. They also thought, what if we could install a puppet in the United States? I thought that was beyond us for decades, but it might be a real possibility here. Trump and Yanukovych, of course, were similar figures, nihilistic, venal, seeking power to make or shield money. This made them vulnerably eager partners for Putin, and they had the same chief advisor, interestingly enough, don't you think? The American political consultant Paul Manafort, right? What are some of the similarities between Viktor Yanukovych and Donald Trump? Well, right, rich, venal, seeking power to shield their money and influence, yes, but also both run by Paul Manafort. That seems weird. Russian soft control of Trump did not require endless personal meetings between the two principals. It just required a mutual understanding, which was abundantly on display during the Trump presidency. Think of the meeting between Putin and Trump in Helsinki in 2018, when the American president said that he trusted the Russian one, and the Russian president said that he had supported the American one as a candidate. The acknowledgement of mutual debts was obvious already in 2016. Russian media talked up Trump, and Trump talked up Putin. All true, and I think comports with everyone's memory here as well. But just to reiterate one of the points here made, Russian soft control of Trump did not require endless personal meetings between the two principals. It just required a mutual understanding. And Trump and his defense team, if there was ever any sort of trial and all this, would love to point as well. You say we were colluding. We never talked. We never spoke. That's not necessary in order to do what you guys were trying to do here. During Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, in other words, he's going to make like the RICO defendants sort of defense here. And we're not trying to prove the same sort of conspiracy that in many ways it's similar to the way organized crime runs. But I think if you assume that the actors are sophisticated enough, as dumb as one of them is, he thinks he's taking his directions through winks and nods. That means he's not going to need personal meetings. And then he's going to point to the fact that there were very few personal meetings and say it couldn't have happened because of the lack of personal meetings. Not the way it works. Anyway, during Trump's 2016 presidential campaign, the rapprochement between Trump and Putin could be effected through intermediaries. An obvious intermediary was Paul Manafort, who was working for both of them, right? First, he worked for the Russian oligarch Deripaska, though, as a consultant to teach the Kremlin how to influence Americans. Then, he worked for Russia's man in Ukraine, Yanukovych, helping him get elected. Finally, Manafort worked for Trump in the same capacity. You might remember Manafort's ties to Russia as revealed by the press in 2016. He and Jared Kushner and Donald Trump Jr. met with the Russians in June of 2016 in Trump Tower. Manafort had to resign as Trump's campaign manager that August after it became public that he had received $12.7 million in cash while he was working for Yanukovych and had not reported it. By 2016, he was Trump's campaign manager. Manafort owed Deripaska millions of dollars. And at the end of their political collaboration, they had entered into a murky investment, the end of which Deripaska was pursuing Manafort in court. Manafort acknowledged the debt to Deripaska in the sense that he treated his work for Trump as a way to pay it off. As Trump's campaign manager and as Deripaska's debtor, and remember, Manafort was saying, I'm not taking pay, I'm managing the campaign for free. Wasn't that unusual for a guy who was all about cash, right? So Manafort acknowledged this debt to Deripaska in the sense that he treated his work for Trump as a way to pay it off. As Trump's campaign manager and as Deripaska's debtor, Manafort wrote to offer Deripaska private briefings on the Trump campaign. Through an intermediary, Manafort sent the Russians data from the Trump campaign, including campaign polling data about Americans that would be useful for influence operations. Manafort was asked to communicate a Russian plan for the partition of Ukraine to Trump. Manafort was hoping to pay Deripaska back in a currency other than money. In Manafort's own words, to, quote, get whole. These and other details are in, I guess, his book, Road to Unfreedom. So you see what's happening here, right? Deripaska hires Manafort for several different kinds of work. They enter into a business agreement. It turns out that somewhere along the line, Manafort ends up owing millions of dollars to Deripaska. Deripaska, in the old days, or, if you were a Russian, he could just kill you over the money. But as an American and as a, above board operator, he figured maybe he could pursue him through the courts and get this money. But Manafort doesn't have the cash to give him anyway. But instead he says, what if I were to work to use the same magic I used to make Yanukovych president of Ukraine and turn him into a pro-Putin leader of Ukraine, if I could do the same thing and turn Trump into a pro-Putin president of the United States, wouldn't that be of value to you? Well, Deripaska would say, well, if he was a pro-Deripaska president, maybe that might be something. But I also recognize that I can trade this with Putin and say, well, Putin, I've got a guy who can implement your wildest dream of being able to control the United States president more or less directly. If I can pull that off at my expense, can you make it worth my while? I wanted to get this money out of what's his name over here, but he's never going to come up with the cash. But I can get him at no additional expense to me to do this work. Will you pay me for this work? Will that make me whole such that I don't have to try to bother recovering this money from Manafort anymore? I think that was the scheme. Thinking our way back to 2016, Snyder continues, keeping in mind Russia's pattern of seeking soft control, recalling what we know now, let's reconsider how the FBI treated the Trump-Putin connection that year. After Trump became president, he and some other Republicans claimed that the FBI had overreached by carrying out any sort of investigation at all. Now that McGonigal has been arrested, Trump has claimed that this somehow helps his case. In other words, he's been spending the weekend up in New Hampshire and making campaign swings and saying, I told you the FBI was corrupt. I told you. Now they caught this McGonigal guy. Who was right about this? It was me. I told you they were corrupt. They were corrupt, but they were pro-Trump corrupt. You got caught. Not me. No, these guys got caught. They were working for you. Not me. I wasn't bribing them. They were working on your behalf. The FBI was corrupt. And maybe you might be able to somehow, some way, both sides this somewhere, but it doesn't erase your side. And the one we have actual hard proof about things about is yours. In other words, maybe both sides were doing it, but we're still looking for the proof that the Democrats were benefiting from the corruption of the FBI. Whereas right in front of us are 6-10 cases of evidence that the Republicans were benefiting from the corruption of the FBI. Did both sides do it? I don't know, but there's evidence of one. I'm open to the possibility that there's evidence of two, but we're not going to wait. We have evidence of one, prosecute the evidence of the one. You tried to prosecute evidence of the other. It didn't work. You couldn't come up with the evidence, and it was a flimsy BS story in 2016 about Clinton's emails. You tried the Durham investigation. That didn't work either. Everything you're trying, whatever motivation you may be using, you're unable to come up with anything. You do the whole formal investigation thing. You give it all the latitude you want. You got special counsel status. Still can't come up with anything. We can't stop coming up with things for you, but we're still waiting to both sides this thing for some reason. Well, anyway, where were we with this? Right. So Trump has claimed that this somehow helps his case. Common sense suggests the opposite. The man who was supposed to investigate Russian support of Trump took money from a Russian oligarch close to Putin, who was at one remove from the Trump campaign at the time. That is not at all a constellation that supports Trump's version of events. If the FBI special agent, McGonigal, who was investigating Trump's connection to Russia, was on the payroll of the Russian oligarch, Deripaska, to whom Trump's campaign manager, Manafort, owed millions of dollars and provided information, that does not look good for Trump. It looks hideous, but not just for Trump. Ann Applebaum, that's an interesting pull here, once put the question the right way. Why didn't the FBI investigate Trump's connections to Putin much earlier? In retrospect, it seems as though the FBI investigation of Trump's campaign and its Russian connections in 2016 was not only too late, but weirdly understated. Known as Crossfire Hurricane, it defined the issue of Russian influence narrowly, as a matter of personal contact between Trump campaign officials and Russians. Meanwhile, as that investigation was going on, Russia was in the middle of a major social media campaign, which, according to the leading scholar of presidential communications, and there's a link here to whoever that might be, made it possible for Trump to be elected. And that larger influence campaign was not investigated by the FBI, let alone countered. If anything, it looks as though the New York office of the FBI, wittingly or unwittingly, rather pushed in the same direction that pushed in the same direction than resisted Russia's pro-Trump influence operation. As no doubt everyone remembers, Russia was able to fish for emails from institutions and people around Clinton and used some of them, out of context, to create harmful, fictional narratives about her. Simultaneously, there was a concern about Clinton's use of a private email server. In the popular mind, these two issues blurred together. With Trump's help, Trump asked the Russians to break into Clinton's email account, which they immediately tried to do. Nothing about Clinton's emails proved to be of interest. The FBI closed an investigation in July of 2016, saying there was no basis for criminal charges against Clinton. Then, weirdly, FBI Director James Comey announces on October 28th, 2016, just 10 days before the election, that the investigation into Clinton's emails had been reopened. This created a huge brouhaha that, as the polls showed, harmed Clinton and helped Trump. The investigation was closed again after only 8 days on November 6th with no charges against Clinton, but that was just 2 days before the election and the damage was done. As I recall it, in the fury of those last 48 hours, no one noticed Comey's second announcement, closing the investigation and clearing Clinton. I was canvassing at the time, and the people I spoke to were still quite excited about the emails. Why would the FBI publicly reveal an investigation on a hot issue involving a presidential candidate right before an election? It now appears that Comey made the public announcement because of an illicit kind of pressure from special agents in the FBI New York office. Comey believed that they would leak the investigation if he did not announce it. In office, Trump knew that Russia had worked to get him elected, but the standard of guilt was placed so high that he could defend himself by saying that he personally had not colluded. The Mueller report, which I still don't believe many people have actually read, demonstrated that there was a multidimensional Russian influence campaign on behalf of Trump. The Trump administration countered by claiming that there was no evidence that Trump personally had been in contact with Putin personally. That defense was certainly misleading, but it was available in part because of the narrow scope of the FBI investigations in 2016. To be fair, FBI, along with Homeland Security, did investigate cyber, but this was after the election when it could make no difference. And in the report, cyber was narrowly defined, limited to phishing and the breach of systems. There are more important issues, but they were not the main issue. What the phishing and breach of, these are important issues, but they're not the main issue. What the phishing and breach of systems enabled was the main issue. A social media campaign that exploited emotions, including misogyny, and mobilize and demobilize, voters. Ugh, I'm ruining the story here. But Russia used the raw email in specific operations on Trump's behalf. For example, by rescuing him from the Access Hollywood tapes scandal. Right after it emerged that Trump advocated sexual assault, that's what he was saying, Russia released a fictional scandal connecting Clinton to the abuse of children. That allowed Trump's followers to believe that whatever he did, she was worse, and the scandal was blunted. You do remember that. That was the Pizzagate thing, right? Oh, well, sure, he advocated sexual assault, but of at least adult women, whereas Clinton was running a child sex thing, the whole stupid story they came up with. It was ridiculous, but they did circulate it, and it was at that time, and people did buy it because people are dumb. So again, that allowed Trump's followers to believe that whatever he did, she was worse, and the scandal was blunted. It verges on inconceivable. The McGonigal was unaware of Russia's 2016 influence campaign on behalf of Trump. He knew the players. He is now alleged to have been employed by one of them. Even I was aware of Russia's 2016 influence campaign. It became one of the subjects of my book, Road to Unfreedom, which I finished the following year. The Russian influence campaign was an issue for American counterintelligence. It's worth pausing to understand why, since it helps us to see the centrality of McGonigal and the meaning of this scandal. Intelligence is about trying to understand. Counterintelligence is about making that hard for others. Branching out from counterintelligence are the more exotic operations designed to make an enemy not only misunderstand the situation, but also act on the basis of misunderstandings against the enemy's own interests. Such operations, which have been a Russian or Soviet specialty for more than a century, they go under the name of provocation or active measures, or, and here we have some Russian here, Maskirova. And I don't know whether I'm pronouncing it correctly, but interesting, that's where the active measures. If you ever wondered, what do they mean active measures? Is it just some weird nonsense term? Apparently not. It is the task of counterintelligence to understand active measures and prevent them from working. The Russian influence operation on behalf of Trump was an active measure that the United States failed to halt. The cyber element, the use of social media, is what McGonigal personally, with his background and in his position, should have been making everyone aware of. In 2016, McGonigal was section chief of the FBI's Cyber Counterintelligence Coordination Section. That October, he was put in charge of the Counterintelligence Division at large of the FBI's New York office. So he was the guy who the FBI would have charged with the responsibility for teaching people, all right, listen, what's happening on social media is the Russians are driving this. They are attempting to divide Americans, confuse Americans, undermine institutions, et cetera, all the things we learned later on. This was actually his job as, at the time, FBI's Cyber Counterintelligence Coordinator. He didn't do it. He got promoted nonetheless, but they put him not only in a new job, but in a new job that actually enabled him to do even more to further the Russian influence campaign in the United States. How odd is that? And it was just then, in October of 2016, that matters began to spin out of control. There were two moments late in the presidential campaign that decided the matter for Donald Trump. The first was when Russia rescued him from the Access Hollywood scandal on October 7th. The second was FBI Director James Comey's public announcement he was reopening the investigation of Hillary Clinton's emails on the 28th of October. The reason Comey made the public announcement at that highly sensitive time, 10 days before the election, was not that he believed the public needed to know, nor that the matter was likely of great consequence. On his account, it was that he believed that FBI New York office was going to leak it anyway. Rudy Giuliani had apparently been the beneficiary of those leaks and claimed to know in advance of what he called a surprise that would help Donald Trump, namely Comey's public announcement of the email investigation, or at least that the information was coming out one way or another. If Comey didn't announce it, the FBI in New York would leak it. It looked at the time like Comey had been played by people in FBI New York who wanted Trump to win. Comey has now confirmed this, although his word choice might be different. And I did wonder back then if those special agents in New York, in turn, were being played. It was no secret at the time that FBI special agents in New York did not like Hillary Clinton. Making emotional commitments public is asking to be exploited. And so they had made those commitments public, and now they were being exploited. That was his theory. For people working in counterintelligence, this is a particularly unwise thing to do. The nature of working in counterintelligence is that if you are not very good, you will find yourself in the vortex of someone else's active measure. Someone else will take advantage of your known vulnerabilities, your misogyny perhaps, or your hatred of a specific female politician, or your entirely unjustified belief that a male politician is a patriotic messiah, let's say, and get you to do something that feels like your own decision. Now that we are informed that a central figure in the New York FBI office was willing to take money from foreign actors while on the job, this line of analysis bears some reconsideration. Objectively, FBI New York was acting in concert with Russia, ignoring or narrowly defining Russia's actions and helping deliver the 1-2 punch to Clinton in October that very likely saved Trump. When people act in the interest of a foreign power, it is sometimes for money. It is sometimes because the foreign power knows something about them. It is sometimes for ideals. And it is sometimes for no conscious motive at all. What one thinks of as one's own motives have been curated, manipulated, and directed. It seems quite possible, I raise it as a hypothesis that reasonable people would consider, that some mixture of these factors was at work in the FBI New York in 2016. All of these pieces of recent history must hang together in one way or another, and the fresh and shocking revelation of McGonigal's arrest is a chance for us to try to see how. Again, if these allegations are true, they will soon be surrounded by other heretofore unknown facts, which should lead us to consider the problem of election integrity in a general way. As of right now, the circumstantial evidence suggests that we consider the possibility that the FBI's reporting work in 2016, which resulted in a framing of the issue which was convenient for Trump and Russia, might have had something to do with the fact, per the indictments, that one of its lead agents was willing to take money from the foreign actors he was investigating while on the job. In connection with the leaks from FBI New York late in the 2016 campaign, which had the obvious effect of harming Clinton and helping Trump, McGonigal's interest also demands a broader rethink of the scale of the 2016 disaster. How much was FBI New York, wittingly or unwittingly, caught up in a Russian active measure? Hi everybody, it's me, David Waldman. Yes, the same guy who interrupts you all the time. Interrupting you one more time, just to tell you again, another reminder that your contributions are what keep this show on the air, and patreon.com, patreon.com, is still among the easiest ways to make the sustaining subscription donations that keep us afloat. Are you ready for the pep talk about how our Patreon campaign is still going strong and growing? Well, too bad. Yeah, the plain fact is we actually are headed in the wrong direction, and whereas we once had about 175 monthly patrons, we're now actually down below 150. Time to recruit some more. Not exactly the kind of news I wanted to share, but there it is. For those of you in a position to support the show, patreon.com does make it easy to make those secure, recurring monthly contributions to do so. Patreon.com/KagroX gets you straight to our donation page. We've been through a lot together. The worst of the pandemic, we hope. The worst of the insurrection, we hope. So go ahead and treat yourself. You don't need an excuse. Give yourself the gift of a little something you enjoy in life. Support the show. And of course, if you happen to prefer using PayPal or even the Square Cash app, we're up and running on those options too. So thanks again, everyone, for all your support. We couldn't, or at least shouldn't, do it without you. Hope you'll be on board soon too. Thanks for all your support. All right, welcome back now to the Kagro in the Morning Show here on Netroots Radio. Those of you just rejoining us missed the briefest exchange of greetings ever. That was really something. See, Joan's call came in just seconds before we were supposed to sort of enter our dark phase here, letting the music take us back in. It was like, "Hi, Joan, how you doing?" "Oh, hi." And then silence.
Skype was balky this morning.
Okay, well, no problem. These things happen, and you're here, and that's good news.
And I come with breaking news.
Oh, all right, excellent.
Sorta.
All right.
George Santos is stepping off of his committee assignment.
Oh, okay.
Fellows this morning.
That's interesting. It may just be that he doesn't feel like working, but
I don't think so.
Okay. Well, that's interesting.
There are two very real possibilities. One, which I think is probably a little bit more likely.
Okay. Let's hear them.
The one possibility is there's another big story about to break, but how can anything be bigger than what we've heard?
He's a Martian. Oh, no.
But I think the real one is McCarthy still wants to kick Ilhan Omar off of her committee assignments, the Democrat, off of Foreign Affairs assignment. And he's having a lot of trouble getting the votes to do that. I think that this is sort of a quid pro quo. He can tell his people that are balking about that, look, I got Santos to do this. You can't be subject to hypocrisy labels if we do this, if we deal with him.
I could see that. It might make people like, I don't know, the moderate-ish people who are fake moderates, like Nancy Mace or something.
Mace, Joyce from Ohio. David Joyce from Ohio just popped up as one. Kem Buck says he won't.
Okay.
Victoria Spartz from Indiana. And Gates is undecided. And, of course, you've got Florida man out still.
Yeah.
From his accident. So, there's five.
So that's enough for them to lose the vote on booting Omar if they go to that. But yeah, I guess this would be, so I think Nancy Mace has been in the position. She's sort of the avatar for everybody here. Well, it will look terrible. I don't like the idea of booting Ilhan Omar off the committee. It's not really all that well founded, but so all by itself, I didn't want to do it. But when you couple that with us leaving George Santos in place, we look like a bunch of idiots. Well, what if yeah, okay. So now you'll just say, well, now we just look like a bunch of partisans instead of a bunch of partisan idiots. All right. That's an improvement, right? We are partisans, so I guess it's okay.
Apparently McCarthy met with Santos last night one-on-one, and I think that was probably in the works then. So I'm pretty sure that this is why. Yeah.
Well, okay. That's a pretty good supposition there. I think that's very likely. It sounds like the sort of thing that they would do, some kind of weird half measure to make themselves look better for making this pointless gesture of throwing Ilhan Omar off committees, which, is there retaliation for previously on a bipartisan basis denying committee seats to Murdery Trader Green and Paul Gosar, who actually did things wrong and were a significant danger to their, really a personal, direct physical danger to other members of the committee. They're weird and potentially violent and never stopped in any of their rhetoric that was about visiting violence on their colleagues, whereas Ilhan Omar has made some unfortunate statements and, they've been lousy, but none of them have ever been, and I want to decapitate my colleagues.
Right.
That would be bad. That's the sort of thing that gets you kicked off a committee, usually. But here they just figure no Republican will oppose it because she's a widely reviled figure among Republicans. If they thought that they could get the same number of votes together for kicking AOC off of her committees, they would do it.
Oh,
they
definitely.
just can't.
No.
Even Nancy Mace won't do that at the moment.
No.
So, okay. Very interesting. It's been a week, 2 really, since we spoke. But
I read your I listened to your previous.
Oh, okay.
And had read that story yesterday and just got mad at James Comey all over again.
Yeah.
And the New York Times. And
sure.
It's an important story. It's a big deal.
It is. It's astonishing that it isn't being viewed that way for some. I mean, it used to be.
Donald Trump is running for president again.
Yeah. Well, yeah. But also just this is a movie headline. The big chief at the FBI was on the take the whole time. Oh, yeah. Well,
From Russia.
Yeah. Not just Russia, but like I was saying yesterday about this, like Oleg Deripaska. This would be like, in World War II being like, there's a guy I think the OSS should smuggle out of Germany. He could be a real asset to us. What's the name? Hitler. No. Yeah. Not Hitler. We're not going to smuggle him out of there. You're being hoodwinked. You're wrong about that. I don't know. I think he's a bit player. No, he's the guy. Oleg Deripaska, who, is involved in everything.
Mitch McConnell on up.
Yes. Right. The aluminum plant that never came to be, by the way. Where are the angry people who thought they were going to get jobs there in Kentucky? I don't know. They're busy blaming it on drag queens instead, I guess, as opposed to, I'm going to give you a job in a new aluminum plant. And it doesn't materialize. It's not because that guy was corrupt. It's because somebody else has too much makeup on when they read stories to kids. That's why I don't have a job. So Oleg Deripaska, who manipulated and worked with Paul Manafort, both to elect a puppet president in Ukraine, and then elect a puppet president in the United States, and they find the guy who's on the take to him the whole time, who was supposed to be the one warning us about active measures of the Russians and doesn't warn us. McConnell, who finds out that we were not warned but subject to the influence operation anyway, and says, you better not tell anybody, and then gets paid off with a fake announcement of a aluminum plant. And On top of it all, in June of 2016, the Republican House leadership is caught on tape talking about, hey, the Ukrainian prime minister just came all the way to the United States to warn us about the way Russians manipulate elections. It's just happened to us. We think it's in the middle of happening to you. Paul Ryan says this is horrific and maniacal, but don't tell anybody because we're going to win. And everybody says, yeah, that's the way we should do it. And what becomes famous out of it is McCarthy then says, hey, I think Putin pays Trump, which, I'm glad he said it. He pretended it was a joke later, but that's, that too now fits. Now it actually looks like it makes some more sense.
Yes.
Not that we doubted it at the time, but, and now, of course, we now say, well, you know what a really good normal thing to do would be is to take that guy who said that
make him Speaker of
and
the
make
House.
him Speaker of the House. Right. And kick off, off of the Intelligence Committee, everybody who actually understands what happened here. And, I don't know what else. So, isn't that enough? But that's where we now stand is all the people who were supposed to be warning us and investigating this actually weren't because they were being paid by the people who were doing it. And then, and by the way, then they had an insurrection in the middle and tried to take over. And, well, whatever. It didn't work. So let's just roll the dice and see what's what. And, like we,
Move along.
Yeah, right. And forget about it and just, but some interesting points made about that. And, the fact that there's still lots of people here in the United States, even who are well-intentioned and who are well-informed, who say things like, yeah, well, when the Russians invaded Ukraine in 2022, and you sometimes correct them, well, they invaded Ukraine in 2014. It's been going on for 6 years. Oh, yeah, that's right. But even that, like, oh, yeah, that this article that we were just reading was, well, that too was a Russian active measure to convince the West that what was happening in Ukraine wasn't an invasion. It was something other than an invasion. It had cannons and tanks and death, but yeah, it was something else. And then a guy ran for president and became president who said not only did it not happen that way, but it was natural and normal. And really it should have been Russian the whole time anyway. And P.S., Hunter Biden, something, and do me a favor. It's really rather incredible.
Yes, it is.
It'd make a good, if dumb, movie, but it's actually real. So,
or several movies.
Yeah.
Manchurian Candidate would
Right.
be one.
That's true. All that have been made already in these movies. And why we didn't recognize it, I'm not sure. But, well, so now they are in charge in the House. Sort of.
Yeah. Sort of.
They, we're not.
For now, I don't know how long that's going to last.
Mm-hmm.
At least this iteration.
Yeah.
4th of July for McCarthy? Maybe? I don't know. Part of it will depend on how he does in these debt ceiling negotiations, which aren't negotiations because so far Democrats are saying, yeah, right.
Yeah.
Which is the appropriate response.
I guess so.
I still wish they had dealt with it in the lame duck. I still wish that this wasn't a possibility.
Yeah.
But McCarthy's weakness does make it less likely that they'll be able to really secure any kind of harm to, I hope.
I hope so. That would be
to ongoing programs.
A nice outcome. I wonder if, I don't know, just had a flash in my mind of the thing I was saw at the beginning of the show that I guess the idea that the public health emergency related to the pandemic might be called to a close in May.
Yes.
They should push that up, and then Republicans will use that as an excuse to, I don't know what. They're already going about unmasked and unvaccinated, but maybe they can hasten it, and then they'll all be sick, and then they won't be able to have a working majority on hand to vote at any point.
Well, it's possible it happens this week because they're all there voting on ending the public health emergency.
Right. So then they'll all get sick.
That's what this week is devoted to, declaring the pandemic over.
I did not realize
that says the pandemic is over.
Okay. Well, yeah, so maybe if they have those negotiations, we schedule them for small rooms. and then, wow, we can't win the vote. That's weird. But
yeah, that's what they're doing this week, primarily in the House.
All right.
Which is, I think, probably why you got two things out of the White House. Veto threat on these bills. Not that they would make it into the Senate, but, you got to do it. And the announcement that they're going to probably end the public health emergency in May. So.
Okay. Well, I can tell you there's still COVID around.
Yeah.
I tried it out myself last week, and it works. And
I'm sorry.
Yeah. Well, the good news is Paxlovid works too. So,
good.
And even
good.
better than this version. But yeah, I got. I guess the new variants are pretty fast moving, and it was a quick hit. And Paxlovid changed everything, so that's good. But it's still out there. Be careful, even when they end the public emergency. The COVID doesn't read. It does not know.
No, it does not know that it's supposed to be over.
So yeah, right. Protect yourself, and hope. I guess the only outward effect is that the price of taking care of it, if you do get it, goes higher. Maybe that will motivate people to mask.
Well, and the vaccines too.
Yeah.
We're going to have to start paying for those.
Yeah, they'll be $100 plus, and I mean tests. The home test prices never came down. That was no help to anybody. I assume they'll only go up after this.
Yeah, and I don't think that there's going to be the funding for the free tests being provided anymore.
Yeah. So if you haven't fulfilled your quota on those, go ahead and get them.
Yeah.
You'll want to know. Occasionally, even if you're not particularly concerned with things and whatever. I don't know why you're listening to the show if that's the case, but if you're still concerned, eventually you'll want to visit somebody that you'll say, you know what, I should take a test before I go, and they'll be on hand.
Yes.
So, all right. You've been covering all of the craziness of the past week or so. I did notice, so I see your story was already up about the Santos situation. Yes. So that's cool. Everybody can now go and read about that afterwards. And I grabbed something the other day on the basis of the headline of Marjorie Greene having been humiliated in some fashion. I said, I got to discuss that one. What happened?
That's always fun.
Yeah.
Well, they did the good thing. I do actually like this thing that they did on behalf of the Freedom Caucus. Every now and then they come up with one that I like, of a modified open rule.
Okay.
Of
so
course,
bringing a bill
where
to
they
the floor
apply
with,
the modified open rule, which bills they allow that on is going to be a thing.
Sure.
But for the first
that's
time
nice.
since, 2016, I think, there was a modified open rule on the strategic petroleum bill that the Republicans had. It was a stupid bill.
Okay.
Trying to restrict what Biden could do with opening up the reserve. All of it contrary to existing law, of course.
Well, law
and
law.
Green had an amendment along with, I think there was like 80% of the amendments were from Democrats.
Okay.
Who clearly are far more used to flexing their policy muscles and coming up with things like legislation.
Yeah.
Lawmaking, you might say.
Right.
But Marjorie Taylor Greene had one, and she got 14 votes for it.
So, okay, 14. That's a lot.
Yes.
What was she trying to do? Do you recall?
I'd just say that Biden couldn't sell from it at all, I think was.
Oh, okay.
Was
so they were trying to cap his ability to.
Yeah, say that he cannot release any petroleum from the strategic reserve unless he opens up more public land for development. Which is dumb.
Yeah. I mean, it's essentially anti-lowering gas prices. But
yeah.
They don't want him to be able to do that.
Right.
And they do want to be able to open up more public lands to drilling, except that once again, we've been through this a million times. There's lots of leases available. People are holding them and doing nothing with them because it doesn't make any sense.
There are thousands of unused leases out there. That's not the issue at all, and everybody knows it.
Yeah.
So a few amendments did make it through.
Well, that's nice. I'm
Not
sure it's
very
fun.
many Democratic ones. They did
Right.
not block. I mean, none of this is real because it's not going to happen. But the votes were taken
Okay.
anyway.
Right.
None of
I
the
see what you mean.
anti-offshore drilling bills from Democrats passed, but the ones from Florida Republicans did, of course, because
Yes.
offshore drilling is only a problem, apparently, for Florida.
Yeah. If you own property, if you're a Republican and you own beachfront property and you don't want drilling, that's okay. But if you are a Democrat and either own beachfront property or just think it's a bad idea, you're wrong.
Yes.
So, all right. Well, thankfully they took care of their hypocrisy problem earlier today with George Santos. So,
Yes, but I do like that they allowed, at least on this one vote, the modified open rule. I think
yeah,
that's
sure.
a great thing to do. The modification is you had to get your amendment into the congressional record the night before.
That is not onerous.
No,
So, yeah, and
particularly if you're a Democrat and you're used to doing legislation.
yeah, right, and you know how to write it, and you can do it. I mean,
Yeah.
what's fun about it, and for everybody's benefit here, I think most of the audience remembers that this is the open rule, the modified open rule, however you want to put it, and the modifications are something else we'll discuss
Yeah.
another day. But yeah, essentially all it means is bills are wide open for amendment. Just
Right.
the way you've learned it in school.
Right. You don't have to get your amendment through the Rules Committee to be approved. You just
Yeah.
get it published in the congressional record, and they decide on the fly
It's a good
whether it's
thing.
germane, whether it actually applies to the underlying bill and can go forward and be voted on. It's fun to watch.
It is. And legislators like it because, you know, if you're a backbencher or you're not on that committee, usually you don't get a chance to do anything like this. I have a good idea. I want to bring it in front of everybody and see.
Yeah.
And so it's fun. And of course, you know, only one side is trained in writing up ideas in the language of ideas. And that's the Democrats. And so, yeah, you tend to get things like, again, this is all about energy and drilling, and you'll get Republicans will be there with things that say gas prices have to be $1 a gallon and
Right.
no abortions or else something. I'm going to ban drag queens. What? I mean, that's what it says, but it doesn't have any legal force because it doesn't make any, you know, you don't name any parts of the U.S. code. You're just saying things that you want. There's something in here about free pizza. I don't understand it. But okay, you know, you get to offer it as an amendment and everyone will say, this doesn't make any sense. No. Like she did. 14
Yes.
14 votes. Which, yeah, I read quickly through your thing that I think there was comment from Pete Sessions. Was that right?
Yes.
Saying, you know, well, maybe that'll teach her to be stupid, you know?
Yeah.
That if you offer a dumb amendment.
Specifically refer to her, but it was pretty much clearly about her.
Wink, wink, wink.
Yeah.
I was I'm not talking about her. I'm talking about any bill that gets 14 votes.
Yes.
And, yeah. So, but it is a good thing. And it's also a common thing. Every once in a while, especially when control of the House changes hands, even when Democrats come in, they say sometimes, we're going to do a couple more of these. We're going to have some more open rules. And it works well once or twice, and then it starts to get annoying.
Right.
If you're in the majority, and people start bringing tough votes, like, oh crap, this is going to make me look like a hypocrite.
Yeah.
But it works well for Republicans because they say, I am a hypocrite. It's fine.
Yeah.
And they were very happy to do that.
You do still have the pretty good block of Freedom Caucus people who like this and want this and demanded this.
Yeah.
And McCarthy's going to have to be careful about taking it away from them because, yes, they also have the one person can stand up and call a no confidence vote in him.
Right. So he's going to have to deal with this. And, you know, it gives Democrats an opportunity to actually maybe change the outcome on something, not overall, but, you know, fine tune a bill. Usually they'll just vote. I mean, Republicans are also used to voting party line and saying, it doesn't matter if it's a good idea. We're just not going to give Democrat credit for it. And They'll bring back, coming with it will be one of the old maneuvers that also disappeared, which is, oh crap, somebody from the minority had a good idea. Steal it,
Yes.
put a majority name on it, and vote no on the Democratic version and yes on the Republican one. So we'll see that happen again, I'm sure.
I'm sure we'll see that happen again, yes.
But in the meantime, it's not a bad thing. Republicans will eventually abandon it, I think, when they come up against their first time constraints. Something has to be passed before a certain date, and if we have an open rule on these two bills, we'll never get to the important one that has to be done by Friday, and
right.
They'll close it again.
But, looking ahead, we don't really get to that until September.
Yeah, so we may have some exciting times ahead, and we'll see how long
definitely
they can tolerate it.
Exciting times ahead.
Yeah.
Maybe even some illuminating times ahead. It could be really interesting.
Okay. Well, I'm for that.
Oh, my goodness. My dog is having a sneezing fit.
Oh, I was wondering what that was. I was like, it sounds like a bark, but not really. It's a very, might be one of those low, rough things when somebody's at the door. Some people go crazy. Some dogs go crazy. Some just a sneezing attack, huh?
Yes. She does this periodically. That was a short one.
Okay. That's a new one. I'll have to use that for sound effects.
Okay.
Oh, I have
back to Crazy Republicans. What's also going to be fun is seeing the Rules Committee now with Tom Massey, who's not a Freedom Caucus person, but he's the House version of Rand Paul.
Okay, yeah.
And
I see what you mean.
two Freedom Caucus people, Norma from Oklahoma and, Oh, I just wrote it up. Anyway,
we'll look for it. We'll find
that's going to be really kind of interesting.
What are they doing?
They're on the Rules Committee now.
Oh, okay.
There's three of them is enough of a block.
Right. So they could presumably continue to fight for this open rules procedure, I see.
Or from all sorts of things.
Or be total hypocrites.
That's
totally within bounds for them to do. It'll be exciting, and I guess for C-SPAN watchers it'll be exciting, and for non-C-SPAN watchers maybe you want to give a look. Just if you're home with COVID,
sort of the house
got nothing else
in
to do.
Action, something actually happening in the house where they all have to be there, and this is another thing. Of course, we don't have proxy voting anymore.
Right. So they all have to not only be there and, of course, risk COVID, but waste time, essentially. So every bill that comes with 100+ amendments means I'm here all day and I'm not going anywhere.
And that's what we saw last week. And because McCarthy did say, okay, C-SPAN can have a couple of extra cameras, you saw more happening.
They did do that.
More angles. You saw more of the meetings. It was really interesting.
Yeah, I do. I like this. I love the camera angles that they got. I was hoping that, this became very popular, this idea, but it was really bugging me, the idea of having C-SPAN controlled cameras, unless they hammered out some agreement on keeping the video public domain. I was a little worried about the extra cameras.
Yeah.
But I don't know what they worked out, if anything. But C-SPAN has, despite the good guy image, they've got a bad guy reputation when it comes to intellectual property rights on what they film.
Yes.
And I've had a personal run-in with them over those things in the past, and so is there's a lot of people who have, and they're not good actors when it comes to that. So I hope we're not trading good camera angles for public ownership of their footage. But they might have made some concessions with respect to what they film on the House floor, which would be good. What a great way to work it out. If they could give them the camera angles they want, but they have to surrender the video to the public domain. We'll see whether they did. I bet they didn't, because I'm the only person saying they should.
I'll have to look into that. By the way, the other member I was trying to think of, we've got Chip Roy.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Well, he's an interesting case himself.
It's Roy, Massey, and Ralph Norman.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, Massey, he's a bit of a wild card. Chip Roy is a little bit too, though. every once in a while he does something that makes you say, there's a live person in there somewhere. I can see it. Oh, well.
Remember how the Freedom Caucus saved us from the Grand Bargain?
Oh,
just by being themselves and refusing to give on things.
So you could never get to the bargain. It could be the
unintended consequences of the Freedom Caucus that they could be doing, not so bad things in view of the Democrats these days.
I guess so.
Just because they hate leadership.
Yeah, so there's our horseshoe theory of politics in action again, right? They're not helping us because they're on our side. They're helping us because they're so not on the side of their leadership that it ends up sort of working to our benefit anyway.
Yeah.
They don't have to join us. They just have to not join them in order to make things happen like that. All right.
And that works fine by me.
Yeah, I'll take it. And I'm glad you got an eye on it for us. And we'll all get to watch a little actual legislating in action. I recommend it. Like you say, spend some time watching it, and you'll see just the difference as they read the amendments offered by Republicans versus Democrats, and you'll see who has a command of policy and who is a culture warrior,
right.
Making blog posts as amendments.
That's the next time we get a modified open rule. It's not going to happen for a while, I imagine.
Okay.
It's fun when it happens.
Yeah, well, maybe we'll send a flag up at Daily Kos every once in a while. Everybody tune in and watch the fireworks today. But I appreciate it. Thank you very much again, Joan. Stay away from COVID, please.
I'll do my best.
Okay.
I'm glad you're recovering.
Yes, thank you very much. And best to the dog. Bless you, doggy.
Maybe she has COVID. Oh.
Yeah, well, I guess that happens these days. We'll hope not, and speak again next week.
Absolutely.
Okay, terrific. Take care, everybody. Time for us to hand things over to Justice Putnam now for the West Coast Cookbook and Speakeasy coming up next, right here on Netroots Radio.
From netrootsradio.com.
See, I told you it was Netroots Radio.
You have been listening to Kagro in the Morning with David Waldman.
Well, there's an awful lot happening in the world, and some of it is really interesting and has to do with the former guy, and Justice Putnam's got the story. In fact, today, for his leadoff story, the Trump Stormy Daniels hush money case resumes beyond the reach of Bill Barr's obstacles up there in New York. The grand jury hearing indictment material on that. Stay tuned. Next.